Hi, everybody. Uh, Thank goodness for Joe McKinney and Thibaut Serlitz and Matt McKibben and the whole team who organized this. And welcome, kindred spirits, to San Francisco, a place with so much wealth and so much innovation. It's the best governed city in the world, in the best governed state, in the best, most supremely governed country in the world. Wrong. So when I get off that floating city and I get on that land city, my cost of living goes up. My chances of being taxed, panhandled, ticketed, all go up by orders of magnitude. And why is the floating city better? That pre-stead has a special governing framework that borrows best practices from around the world. Click. Yes. And they are not the first to do this. So seasteading is an emergent phenomenon that occurs on blue frontiers all over the globe. And we can begin this story among the 1,000 islands of ancient Greece, which each established their own political system, each competed to attract residents, and that produced this glorious civilization that the West has been worshipfully emulating for 2,500 years. Click. We can also begin in Venice, a startup society on the water, which was part of the kingless, self-governing city-states that kicked off the Italian Renaissance. And it produced so many innovations in finance and art, Western civilization has been imitating them ever since. Click. But I'm going to start the story of seasteading in 2004. I hope you guys can see that tiny little yellow dot. Those are the Marquises Islands, part of French Polynesia. Click. Where this gentleman, Pascal Hatuuku, proposed that Western civilization and Polynesian civilization co-create floating islands. And this was the same year that his country signed the Statute of Autonomy, which empowers French Polynesia to create special economic zones. Click. 4 years later, in 2008, Robert Ballard, who discovered the Titanic, he's been called Carl Sagan with gills, he gave this famous TED Talk where he ended with like the seasteader's clarion call. Click. Why are we not looking at moving out onto the sea? Why do we have programs to build habitations on Mars, but we do not have a program looking at how we colonize our own planet and the technology is at hand? That same year, two Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Peter Thiel and Patri Friedman, co-founded the Seasteading Institute to bring a startup sensibility to the problem of government monopolies that are too big to succeed. And Patri Friedman, a Google engineer, he observed that click, that's Patri and Peter, and then we click again to Steve Wozniak, didn't just change Hewlett-Packard from within. After his personal computer and his whole design for it was rejected by Hewlett-Packard 5 times, he went and founded his own company with Steve Jobs. And where will the Wozniaks of governance go? Click. Patri proposed that if we have a startup sector for governance and people can vote with their houses, we could replace monopolies on government with a market of governance. And voila, we'd solve one of the deepest social challenges at the very root of society. And seasteaders want to tell investors, forget about startup companies. How would you like a startup country? Click. Just one little detail, one little challenge. The technology to do this is slightly expensive. And we discovered that it's unreasonable to ask investors to make that big a jump. So the way to do this is to start small and start scaling up. Come up with a minimal viable product. Meanwhile, across the world in the Netherlands, the world leaders in environmentally sustainable floating real estate, Carina, Bart, and Rutger, had already built the floating pavilion in Rotterdam. It's entirely sustainable. It runs on solar. Click. It recycles all its water, and it's not expensive in shallow water. Click. So I was deputized to write the Seasteading book, to co-write it with Patri. So I went out and found the book written by the co-founder of the company that built this. Click. Rutger de Graaf, and I was astonished to read the following paragraph in his book. How would a floating city be governed? Over the last decades, there has been a shift from top-down hierarchical steering government towards more network-driven, decentralized forms of policymaking with multiple actors, governance. Floating cities offer an opportunity to take this development a step further by using the opportunities that decentralized technologies offer. Floating cities on the ocean would constitute their own state and become members of international organizations such as the United Nations. Well, I'll be damned, I said. An engineer in the Netherlands independently thought of seasteading, and he's actually built something that is currently in use. Click. That's when Randolph Henkin initiated the Great Pivot. In 2013, Randy was executive director of the Seasteading Institute, and he realized that in order for seasteading to happen in 2020 for millions instead of 2050 for billions, we need to combine a governance technology that already works on land with an engineering technology that already works on the water. And the challenge is that shallow waters are all controlled by existing nations. So how do we achieve some measure of political autonomy for our floating islands? We go to countries that already have legal islands. Click. Click. You guys are in for a treat today because Lotta Moberg and Tom W. Bell are both here, and they're going to tell us about special economic zones, which to me are little legal islands created within countries allowing special exemptions from taxes and regulations. And the seasteading strategy was find a coastal nation which already has special economic zones, and we propose extra special economic zones, and we don't even need land. We'll bring our own land. If we fail, that's on us. If we succeed, we share the prosperity. Click. So the great search for a host nation began, and seasteaders dreamed of a magical nation that would fulfill all our requirements. We needed a beautiful, safe, stable country. That crossed half the countries off our list. We needed shallow, calm seas with a variety of natural wave breakers so we could start slowly scaling up. That crossed another 3/4 of countries off our list. Click. We needed government leaders who understand the economic power of small incremental steps towards autonomy, and that crossed another 3/4 of countries off our list. Most of all, we needed a population who wouldn't think seasteaders were crazy. And right when I started to worry that we had just crossed every nation off our list, click. Mark W. Collins reached out to us, and he told us we need a marine culture with a history already friendly to switching among islands and founding new societies. So Mark Collins is the Tahitian visionary who saw the whole thing in his mind before anybody else. He's lived in Silicon Valley, he's lived in Mexico. In Tahiti, he's a famous businessman, and he served on the government as the Minister of Tourism. So he's cultivated relationships all over the Pacific and in France, and he flew here to be with us today. So if you want to learn about seasteading from a Polynesian perspective, talk to Mark. Click. Here's my perspective from my bedroom 3 months ago. So seasteading is about to start in the most beautiful place on earth, in some of the calmest waters on the ocean, click, among some of the warmest and most welcoming people in the world, and it's so heartfelt, we don't even have a word to describe it. It's called mana, It evolved among islands, and everybody who arrives feels it. And let me tell you a little story. Click. In 1960, this English gentleman crashed his boat into Tahiti. He fell in love with a girl, and he decided never to fix his boat. Click. He sold his stories to British newspapers, and people paid him just to read about it week after week. Why? Click. For centuries, Tahiti had been legendary for being an unreachable paradise where European sailors would stop off temporarily and then refuse to leave. It was a siren song. Captains would lose their crew. The real story of the mutiny on the Bounty is largely driven by this. Crew members saying, abandon me here, I have found happiness, I am not leaving, and I'm arming myself if you try to get me back on that boat. So, click. Nearly 6 decades after he crashed his boat into Tahiti, Roger and Juliet run a restaurant on the water. And a few years ago, the gal Roger left behind ran into him at a party and said, "You son of a bitch." So how did she find him? Click. Today, the country has 53 airports, and it took me 7.5 hours to fly from LA to Tahiti. Amazon Prime offers 3-day shipping to Tahiti. Click. So we arrive, and Mark had everything scheduled. The first day, we meet with, listen to this title, the government minister of the blue economy and economic recovery. So I'm like, man, this is going to be easy. His title describes seasteading. And the next day, after he talked to us, he announced to the country that he loved the project, and within months he would be vice president. And over the next 10 days, Mark took us on this whirlwind tour of leading research centers and businesses, and all these Tahitians would quickly become our partners. Click. At the end, we were invited to the presidential palace to meet with President Edward Fritsch and his cabinet and several mayors of islands, and 10 seasteaders gave a 2-hour presentation about the legal, engineering, and business innovations we plan to bring to French Polynesia. Click. And when we were done, President Fritsch said, "Let's build the future together." And here is President Fritsch shaking hands with our superstar of strategy, Nicolas Germineau. For every person like me out there blathering about seasteading, there are actual people behind the scenes actually making it happen. My other angel click. There he is. I think of these guys as my angels in white. The other one is Greg DeLong, who is here. He's founder and CEO of Urban Innovation Exchange Global. Click. Greg has brought a whole community to Seastead that would never understand us otherwise. Click. So a few months later, government ministers flew to San Francisco, and year 1 of the aquatic age began in January, Friday the 13th, when we signed our historic Memorandum of Understanding agreeing to a special governing framework for our floating islands. And that same day, we announced, click, Blue Frontiers, click, there you go. It's a startup company collaborating with the Seasteading Institute, and these are our 5 co-founders and our first 3 staff. And on the left, on your left, beneath the French flag, you see our pillar of law, Tom W. Bell, who conceived the Sea Zone, and he has a lot more liberty up his sleeve, and he's here going to speak. And on the right, next to the French Polynesian flag, you see our engineer of the Sustainable Floating Pavilion in Rotterdam, Bart Rofen. Click. And this is what Bart initially designed for French Polynesia, based on a local flower to honor the Polynesian culture. Blue Frontiers will create environmentally sound, self-sustaining, modular floating islands with significant regulatory autonomy, so people can experiment with values founded in the 21st century instead of the 18th century. Click. And French Polynesia is concerned that they may lose 1/3 of their islands by the end of this century. So floating islands could be very big business in the years ahead. Click. Boom! And that is when the great acceleration began. Just this past May, we co-hosted the first Tahitian seasteading gathering Nearly 100 international guests from 17 countries flew in to attend this. The tickets to this conference weren't cheap, but Tahitians were welcomed in for free because we wanted complete transparency. And the conference was live cast. Anyone in the world could watch any of like the 34 speeches on any subject, and we're uploading all of it onto YouTube. And after the conference, we hosted 2 days of workshops where Tahitians could come and ask any questions they wanted. Click. Dozens of companies sponsored the event. Look at these partners. Air Tahiti Nui, their local airline, sponsored our flights to the conference. Click. Pascal Erhel Hatuuku, I can't pronounce Tahitian, I'm sorry. The original Seasteader, he volunteered to MC the conference, and he never even told anyone that he was the guy who proposed floating islands in 2004. He just presided over this event, and he messed with our heads. So if you can see the slide behind him, he's poking fun at Polynesians who are so happy they're responding to sea level rise by partying and playing music on the ocean floor. Click. So Pascal looks like a Polynesian warrior, and he uses his size for humorous effect. And here he's pacing the stage, warning the speakers about how he will enforce time constraints. And when the speakers would get to the 1 minute mark, he wouldn't flash a sign. He'd walk up and he'd pound the stage with his club. And we were like, Jesus Christ, who is this guy, Mark? And Mark just smiled. He didn't say anything because he arranged it. And then Pascal gets up to speak, and he drops the Polynesian knowledge. Click. He showed how traditional Polynesian technology and modern Western technology evolved many similar concepts in parallel. And I want to quote from his speech. He said, "We Polynesians are a people of the sea, the first seasteaders." Click. Polynesians sailed from island to island, founding new societies, sparking an evolutionary process that created technologies based not on explicit knowledge, but implicit knowledge, which they call mana. And I was told that the main motivation for moving was discontent. So look at these years. When the West was seasteading in ancient Greece, the Pacific navigators were seasteading in the Marquesas Islands. Venice has 118 islands. French Polynesia has 118 islands. The parallels are really compelling, and you can think of this as like the two hemispheres of the brain connecting in Tahiti, the corpus callosum. Click. And Polynesians are intimately familiar with special governing frameworks that float. And why should special governing frameworks just visit paradise when they can stay in paradise? Click. Cruise ships are a one-way service. Cruise ships to the consumer. Floating islands will be peer-to-peer businesses, engaging network effects. Get creative, entrepreneurs. Seastead flag registry, drone food delivery, marine robotics lab. What's the product? I mean, Tahitian coasts are some of the most valuable coasts in the world. We create more coasts. Click. Here's how Blue Frontiers makes money in a simple version. 1, we sell or lease real estate that we create. 2, what I like to imagine as C Combinator, take a stake in companies who want to be part of this Nano Nation accelerator. And 3, intellectual property as we develop the technology for going to the high seas. So now that BART has investigated our protected lagoon in Tahiti, BART discovered we can make these islands much smaller and much cheaper. Click. This is our minimal viable product for freedom. Our floating islands are expected to be about 25 meters by 25 meters, very roughly 5 million each, housing up to 30 residents or a family. BART designed this to be an aquarium restaurant to show people that platforms can be environmentally restorative and increase the sea life. Click. This is the construction process that was overseen by Bart Rofen when he managed the floating pavilion in Rotterdam. These platforms are designed to last more than a century in seawater. For our pilot project, we plan to develop about 12 small floating islands, housing about 200 to 300 people. Click. We're working with several architects who are designing workspaces, hotels, maker spaces. I want to see schools and class trips teaching students about the blue economy. Click. We plan to be about 1 kilometer from shore, tethered to the seafloor, 20 to 40 meters deep. Blue 21 is going to use state-of-the-art technologies to study turbidity, heavy metals, dissolved oxygen, and platforms will increase the amount of sea life locally. Imagine if you could restore the coral reefs simply by the presence of your floating platform. Click. Bart and Karina devised a plan to position the platforms to create some shadows to lower temperatures, just enough to spark the restoration of the corals. This is way beyond sustainability. On the ocean, we can build environmentally restorative communities. Click. By 2020, this lagoon in Tahiti will be home to the first free-floating islands, featuring a range of regulatory innovations in labor, in immigration, fintech, biotech, medical, and it's not just the lagoon. You're the first to hear about it. We requested a 99-year lease for about 100 acres of premium beachfront real estate to be administered under the same jurisdiction as the Sea Zone. That's about a half square kilometer of virgin territory. And look at all those lagoons. I forgot to press click. Click. French Polynesia's only international golf course is right across the way, and we expect to start building in 2018. Click. If you move there, you'll have a view like this from your office or bedroom. We've already raised our seed round, which we're using to fund the following. Click. To make sure every stakeholder is happy, we hired the French law firm, GB2A, to research our sea zone. And just this Wednesday, they delivered a 150-page document, 150 pages. You got a legal problem, come at me, bro. I'm very happy about this. Click. I'm a little biased, but we did our best to hire disinterested parties. This is John Hawkins of EMSI, a respectable economic modeling firm. He's not a seasteader, he's a straight shooter. And here he's presenting his preliminary report live at our Tahitian Seasteading gathering. It was also presented to the government, and he estimates that just in phase 1, the floating islands could, click, create or support more than 600 jobs, pay out more than $23 million in wages each year, and make more than $120 million in sales, and generate more than $7 million in tax revenue each year. And I'm rounding down, and this is just the preliminary report. We'll see how it ends up. Click. As part of our overall funding strategy, Blue Frontiers is in the final stages of validating a token sale. Over the last several months, our team of lawyers and consultants have been completing due diligence on all this, and we've taken into account the recent comments by the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where Blue Frontiers is incorporated. We will be announcing more details in the near future. Sign up for our mailing list to be among the first to learn about it. Go to Blue Frontiers with a hyphen. Thank you very much.